Hey everybody, welcome to Winter Mute Gaming. And here we go again. We are going to talk about some more leaked information from Wizards of the Coast. I'm not going to rehash the whole thing. I'm guessing that if you watch this video, you're already aware of it. I'm going to touch on some of the highlights, but the point, I kind of want to go into something kind of specific. So, there's been some speculation previously about where Wizards is going with all this. What do they want with all this, with stripping away the OGL and locking out VTTs? Now, some of it is obvious. They want the only virtual tabletop that you can use to play D&D to be theirs. End of story. And it's not that because, look, we just dominate the market because we have a great product, which very few people would have a problem with if that was their business model. No, no, you have to use us because we have literally put all the others out of business. We either bought them or we charge them royalties to the point where they can't be profitable anymore, so they just shut down. Or we use some other legal or business mumbo jumbo to kind of just dominate them and push them out of the market completely. So they just want you to be able to use their VTT. Well, okay, we know that. That's obvious. There's no doubt about that. But then this new most recent leak, if it now let me play devil's advocate here and say, you know what, this leak may not be accurate in the sense of what they're saying is true. However, it does line up pretty closely with what they are even if it isn't, it does line up with what they're trying to do and where they're going, and it's giving a pretty, and even if it is not 100% accurate, I don't think it's far from the mark. And part of what they were going for was they were going to start charging people. Basically, they're going to start charging top tier players on their virtual tabletop, uh, uh, one D&D. D&D Beyond. I think they're changing the name a little bit, but um, $30 a month. That's top tier, and you have no restrictions. There are other tiers, but then every lower tier has some sort of restriction on it of some sort. This is in line with, and then they were going to, you couldn't use homebrew at the lower levels. Now that's the accusation from the leak. How that is enforceable isn't clear at first, but then you hear the other bits about it, about how they're really pushing to create a dungeon master style AI to be able to run games for a player or players. Now, that and I could pick apart this again, kind of like when I talked about this whole thing initially on my other channel. I could pick apart any one part and just break it down really deep. But in a generalized sense, it is we know what their business model is, and it is to completely change the way D&D, what D&D is. They don't want it to be a tabletop role playing game anymore. They don't care about that. They want to turn it into a quasi computer game. And they're willing to take whatever steps they need to make this work. And this is absolutely in line with what the head of Wizards has said about wanting to monetize it just like they monetized the video game industry. So again, without doing a deep dive, it all lines up. So, but fundamentally, they may even in the long term opt to just stop printing hardbound books and just say, look, this is what D&D is now. We decided this is what D&D is. There is nothing else out there. There's only D&D. Everything else is irrelevant. You want D&D. What's a tabletop role playing game? We don't even use that term anymore. It's D&D, and I think that's ultimately what they're going to go for. They don't want to see D&D as a tabletop role playing game. They want to see it as just this experience that you log in and you go to your computer and you play with maybe other people and this AI dungeon master is running the game for you. That's in all likelihood their end game. And there's plenty of evidence to support that, even if the exact information that some of these leaks are putting out is not 100% accurate. But but can they actually get away with it? Can they actually pull that off? Can they? Is that possible to fundamentally change the way people see D&D? Well, I'll be honest. When this whole thing started, I would have said I was pretty skeptical of it. And really, one of the first channels I watch, I really enjoy Discourse Miniatures, and I've always been really impressed by her ability to take on, GW, another horrible company. Though at this point they're looking at Wizards. They're looking at Wizards of the Coast, bowing. You go, we're not worthy, in terms of the evil acts that they're doing, and the corporate bullying and just horrible things. But she was very doom and gloom at first. Now she's pulled it back a little bit. And when she was first very doom and gloom, I was a little like, that's a bit, I don't know, that's a bit much. And one of the things that I was very kind of dismissive of was she talked about them wanting to change the definition of Dungeons and Dragons and how it plays and how people see it, away from being a tabletop role playing game to being this computer experience. And I was kind of like, there's no way they're going to be able to do that. But then, I thought back to something that happened just a couple months ago. And when I started thinking about it a little bit more, I changed my mind on this. And I think that it absolutely could happen. And here's how it can happen. So 8 months ago, my son asked, hey, can I play D&D? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, bud. He goes, okay, well, can you download it for me? I'm like, well, that's not D&D is not really a computer game. There are computer games based on D&D, and so I started explaining all that to him. And I actually pulled up an episode of Critical Role, and I watched it with him, and I kind of would pause it and explain, okay, so he's the dungeon master or storyteller, and they're the players, and I kind of just walked him through what's going on. And I had to actually put a lot of effort into explaining it to him because he's just so used to video games. Now that's not a bad thing. I play video games too. I don't make any apologies for that. But he really could he now he's fairly sharp for 10, but he just what a tabletop role playing game is, that it exists, that it's a thing. Just he had never really was exposed to it. Yeah, he's heard the names. He's heard me talk about it. He sees my books on the shelves. He certainly gets exposed to it, but he never really thought about it. To him, it was just some sort of computer game. Obviously, it's like a computer game. Maybe it's like a board game. At one point, he thought it was a board game. I corrected that, but that was a while back. So, but he didn't really know anything else. Now, take this same scenario as is and fast forward it 10 years after, from this point where Wizards of the Coast has managed to put out their product and just completely, this is it. This is all Dungeons and Dragons, the younger generation knows is this computer-esque online experience thing. And to them, it's just one of many options. Now, it's still probably going to be different than any other computer game by its nature. Because if it becomes a bland computer game, I think nobody's going to play it. There has to be something about it to draw people in, to draw the younger generation in. But at some point, even within 5 years, you could start seeing, young teenagers kind of come in and be like, well, yeah, I play D&D. It's like, oh, okay, do you have a local group? Oh, no, I go online. Oh, okay. So you play D&D Beyond. You don't have have you ever done, pen and paper tabletop role playing game or style of D&D? What's that? I think that's a very real possibility because already sometimes I am astounded by the fact that my kids, the things that I have to explain to them that I take for granted because things were very different. I actually grew up before the internet was a thing. The internet really didn't take off as you could get it in your house until right after I moved out on my own, about 17. So, it was maybe because did I let's see, when I moved out on my own, did I even have access to? Oh yeah, yeah, I did. I did. So, I actually grew up without the internet. I was basically an adult. Well, I was emancipated, so I was pretty much an adult when the internet came into my life for the very first time, and you could get it in your house, and it was still dial up. But there are other things too. Like I actually had to explain to my kids what a cassette tape was. They didn't, and now a lot of people, well, there are a lot of people don't really like they know what it is, but it's like, wow, you actually used to play. Oh yeah, cassette tapes, and you had to rewind them and fast forward them, but they didn't even know what a CD was. That's how vastly different things are. Like I get not understanding what a cassette tape is, but they didn't even know what a CD was at one point. And that was only like maybe 2 years ago. I had to explain this to them. Well, it's a compact disc. I'm like, what's that? They're just so used to immediate digital downloads of everything. And again, that's not a bad thing. I revel in that. I love that. But the way they see the world is completely different at this point. Their baseline is completely different, and I think that's what's going to happen with D&D Beyond if Wizards sticks to their gun and is successful enough to change the paradigm of how people see D&D. That you're going to have a generation that will eventually get exposed to D&D and they really do they even know what a tabletop role playing game is? Maybe the website mentions, oh yeah, that's where D&D got its beginning, but we're Wizards of the Coast, D&D Beyond. We are beyond that. We don't need tables anymore. You don't even need a DM anymore. We're going to have AI running the game for you. It's a completely different experience. All that other stuff is your grandparents' game. This is D&D Beyond. And that's all they'll know. That's all they'll know. And the bar, the reality will be completely different for them. So I think the next generation may not know anything else if Wizards of the Coast is successful in this. And if they play the long game, I think that they can be I think they can be successful maybe not in 5 years but in 10 years when you really start seeing a generational shift. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not, because I mean, there's so many variables. We're trying to predict the future. That's an impossibility. But at the same time, you know, is this a chance for the tabletop role playing game industry to break out into a brand new direction and really kind of go into a second renaissance? And I would say the original OGL was a renaissance onto itself, for reasons I've talked about before, um, and for absolutely a good thing, that just opened so many doors for so many people and just really caused the industry to fundamentally change. And Wizards is trying to undo that. And in doing so, they're hoping to basically, with their branding, monopolize the crowd that would be attracted to tabletop RPGs. They just get funneled into D&D Beyond instead. And I think that's ultimately their end game. There is nothing else. D&D, whatever it was, doesn't matter. Here's what it is now. It's all you've ever known, and you will get your monthly subscription, and you will engage in these microtransactions, and that's it. That's it. So that's my worry. The more I think about it, the more, because I don't see Wizards backing down, um, at all. I think that they will. I think they're going to throw throw people some bones and say, "Oh, here you go. Yeah, we'll change the wording there, and yeah, we'll do this over here." But I think that they're gonna turn themselves into a marketing juggernaut. And I think one thing that would really help kick this off and really stymie their efforts is if your more casual player was more engaged in this situation? Because I'm not convinced that every it's one thing to be a gamer, a tabletop gamer, and not be plugged into what's going on and not really understand it. I even talked to a buddy of mine just the other day who wasn't aware of this, and I know he still regularly plays tabletop RPGs, but he had no idea because he doesn't play D&D. I got him to play Pathfinder before a long time ago, and it wasn't his thing, and that's fine. So he's not really plugged into the overall community other than his immediate group, and I'm sure some product releases for World of Darkness stuff. But beyond that, I think you've got, but even some D&D players aren't plugged into this sort of thing. They just buy the books and play with their group. It's a hobby, but it isn't much more than that to them. So I have a feeling some of those people have no idea what's even going on at this point, and that's a shame. It would because and maybe there's a way we can engage with them and get them more active. I don't know how to do it, but I do know that there are now major news networks doing stories on this. Like it's actually showing up on Wall Street in Wall Street Journal and Forbes and MSNBC. Although does that even count as a news network anymore? Uh, so there's a lot of the legacy media, whatever you want to say, they're starting to pick this up and actually talk about it on its own merit because it is such a bizarre situation. It is, even people in business look at this on the outside and say, "Look, I may not know the first thing about tabletop RPGs, but from a business perspective, this is really engaging." And for me, on a legal basis, it's engaging. If I wasn't even invested in the TTRPG aspect of it, because I do have a bit of a legal background. So I find that really interesting. So I don't know. That's my worry. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Am I being overly pessimistic, or or am I not being pessimistic enough? I don't know. Give me some feedback in the comments. But for right now, this is Wintermute signing off.